So let's continue the thought experiment by letting go of all such beliefs, including all such beliefs in the laws of nature, because clearly if this is a virtual reality, then the laws, the potentials of what can be done will be simply dependent upon the programming of the one who is setting up the virtual process. And what if that happens to be you, but that you set it up and then forgot you set it up and entered into it and have lost your way out of this labyrinth? But in fact, you are inherently always already out of it. And the only way it is enjoyable is to forget, in fact, that you are not really in it. And thus this is a play, a game, a video game of an extraordinary complexity and elaborate nature. And if you make the further assumption that you have set up this entire game and that every entity in this game represents an aspect of your own psyche, your own mentalization of reality, that this virtual reality simply reflects back to you in order for you to see all of the fragments of your inner world as an outer world. And that this is, in fact, the therapy that you are doing on yourself. Then simply through the recollection, the recollection of the projections of all those in the physical dimension, the virtual physical dimension, upon which there is an emotional charge, by reclaiming that and integrating that into the recognition that you are, in fact, the mind that has conceived of the entire universe and all of its multidimensional levels, then you will begin to get a sense of your own infinite nature as a consciousness far more intelligent than anything in your wildest dreams that you could imagine being, but that in fact you are. And that in fact your intelligence pervades and encompasses the entire ecosystem of the cosmos. And in the same way that your unconscious ego mind's terminus has various levels, some are visible to you, some are invisible, unconscious, superconscious, beyond the threshold of perception, in the same way that we perceive only a very small sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum of visible light, and there are much more widespread kinds of energies that we mostly do not perceive at all. We can perceive some larger share of the spectrum with various apparatus, but for the most part we are not aware of it. In the same way, we share this space with other beings than the physical, who are at slightly different levels of vibrational frequency. And those that are very close to our own, we can sometimes perceive as ghostly or spectral entities. Others that are at a higher level of distance from the spectrum of the sensory perceptual sliver of reality can either not be perceived or only perceived in altered states of consciousness, of angels, archangels, demonic entities, etc., of far greater polarities of the spectrum, including interdimensional beings of other realms within the cosmos of this virtual plane. But all of it, all of these represent simply reflections of your own single whole intelligence, manifesting as an infinite plurality. The starting point for the realization of the truth of this fact that you are the virtual reality's controller, once you realize again your true nature, this taking control of the virtual realm requires first taking control of your individual mind. You must be in command of every manifestation of the individual mind and be able to silence that mind at will. That power will boost you then to the next level of mind. And the next level of apperception that reveals itself only once the ego identification has died. And there is no further fall into the limited level of the virtual plane. So, in doing this thought experiment now, simply refuse to believe you are the ego. Recognize that the mind is inherently under your control, that you are not an artifact of that mind or of any fragment or introjection in that mind, or any parasitic entity that happens to reside in that mind, but that you are completely the master over your mind and have the power to silence the mind at will. Not that you must gain that power, but that you have it now. You have it, but only if you believe you have it. Now, in order to take control of the mind, you will have to prove your right to do so, because the mind will resist. And you must persuade the mind that all resistance is futile. Either the ego and its conditionings are the boss, or you are the boss. If the ego and its conditionings have control over you, that's called perdition. You are lost. You have lost the video game. But when you take control over the mind and silence it without tolerating resistance, then you win the game. If the mind can convince you that you don't have that power, or you don't even deserve to have that power, or you are afraid of exercising that power because you're afraid you do have it and wouldn't know what to do with it, but whatever you happen to believe that takes away your power, which can only be your own creation, which the mind is, will defeat you and lead you to a fate in which, at some extremity of this virtual reality, producing a situation that at some point will force you to make the choice to claim your power. Your ability to choose to claim it while things are not so extreme produces a higher score and an ability to have more options in how the game is reconfigured. In order to gain the power to silence the mind, you must not be an entity that appears in the mind. Thus, you must not begin with the egocentric premise. The one who silences the mind cannot be the I thought that appears in the mind, or any self-image or self-definition that the mind has given you, or any definition or image others have given you, because all others exist in the same virtual non-reality and are part of the same set of resistances that produce the effect of the enjoyment of the game, as well as the suffering of the game, which happen to be the same. Your only job is to detach from identifying with the system of control that keeps you enmeshed in a false identity. And that system is language. You have been convinced that language gives you power over the material world and over other people, that it gives you the ability to give orders and to communicate, but in fact, language enslaves you into the unreality of this set of conditions that produce helplessness, frustration, and suffering of every sort. Thus, you must come to the realization of a higher level of intelligence that does not use the primitive means of language. Language is extremely primitive because it is linear, and it uses subject-object differentiation, which divides reality into I and not I. But the virtual reality is entirely not I. There is no I within the virtual game. And only by that realization and unfailing recognition do you transcend the level of the game and the rules which will always defeat you because you have compromised your own freedom by accepting the I thought as the basis of your manipulation of the virtual reality. You think of the I thought as your joystick, but in fact it is a jouissance stick that produces more suffering than it does empowerment. Only by letting go of that I stick will you no longer stick to the false self and be able to live in liberation. As a non-localizable field of consciousness, not an entity. And so it is important in the silence to begin to cultivate your sensitivity to the fact that you are a field, not an individual. You've been indoctrinated to think you are an individual pawn on the playing field of this virtual game. You are not. You are the field in which all phenomena arise, change, and disappear. The field itself is the intelligence that shifts the apparent situations of the game, which are only quantum wave functions that respond to the observation of the field itself and manifest a configuration in accord with the will of the field as observer. You are the field and the field's knowing of itself. And the field is boundless, infinite in extent and dimensionality.